I never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get this off my chest because I'm genuinely losing my mind and I don't know if I'm overreacting or if my anger is completely justified. This happened over the past few months and it's been eating away at me every single day. I keep replaying everything in my head, and the more I think about it, the worse it gets. So here's the situation. I'm 32 years old, married to my wonderful wife Sarah for 4 years now, and we just had our first baby 3 months ago, a son. We named him Oliver, and he's absolutely perfect. The pregnancy was difficult for Sarah, really difficult. She had hyperemesis gravidarum, which means she was violently ill for basically the entire 9 months. She lost weight in the first trimester, was hospitalized twice for dehydration, and spent most of her pregnancy absolutely miserable. I felt so helpless watching her go through that. But we were excited. This was our first child, the first grandchild on my side of the family, and we thought everyone else was excited too. My parents, Linda and Robert, had been making comments throughout the pregnancy about how they couldn't wait to meet their grandson, how they were going to be the best grandparents, how this was such a special time. My mom even threw Sarah a baby shower, which at the time I thought was really sweet and thoughtful. She invited all her friends, my aunts, Sarah's family, and made this big deal about becoming a grandmother. My brother Josh is 28, 4 years younger than me. He's always been the golden child, and I know that sounds bitter, but it's just the truth. He's charismatic, funny, works in tech, and makes good money, and my parents have always just gravitated toward him more. Growing up, his achievements were always celebrated more enthusiastically, his problems were always taken more seriously, and his needs always seemed to come first. I accepted this a long time ago. I made my peace with it, or at least I thought I had. Josh isn't married, doesn't have kids, but he has a golden retriever named Captain. Yes, Captain, he got the dog about 2 years ago, and look, I like dogs. I have nothing against Captain, he's a cute dog, but the way my family treats this animal is absolutely insane. My mom has hundreds of photos of Captain on her phone. She calls herself his grandmother. She buys him presents for Christmas and his birthday. My dad built Captain a custom doghouse in their backyard, even though Captain doesn't even live with them. Now here's where everything goes wrong. Sarah's due date was April 15th. We told everyone the date well in advance, made sure my parents knew that we wanted them there at the hospital or at least on call because Sarah's doctor had mentioned that first babies can come unexpectedly and labor can progress quickly or slowly, so we wanted to keep everyone informed. My parents live 45 minutes away from us, so it's not like they'd have to travel across the country. They said they'd be ready, that they were keeping their schedules clear around that time, that they were so excited. Sarah went into labor on April 12th, 3 days before her due date. It started around 6 in the morning with contractions. We waited at home for a few hours as they progressed, timing them like we'd learned in our birthing class. By noon, they were close enough together that we called the hospital and they told us to come in. I was nervous and excited and terrified all at once. This was it, we were about to become parents. I called my parents from the car while Sarah was breathing through contractions. My mom answered and I told her that Sarah was in labor and we were heading to the hospital. I'll never forget her response. She said, and I quote, "Oh honey, that's wonderful, but we actually can't make it today. We have something important we need to take care of, but keep us updated and send pictures once the baby is here." I was confused. Something important? More important than the birth of their first grandchild? I asked her what could possibly be more important, and she got kind of defensive and short with me, saying that they had committed to something and couldn't back out, and that they'd visit in a few days once we were settled at home. Then she said she had to go and hung up. I sat there in the car, phone in my hand, completely stunned. Sarah asked what they said, and I had to tell her that they weren't coming. She looked hurt but tried to hide it, saying it was fine, that maybe they had a good reason. But I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Her own parents had both passed away before we met, so my parents were the only grandparents Oliver was going to have. This was supposed to be a moment we shared with family. The labor ended up being 22 hours long. 22 hours of watching my wife in pain, feeling helpless, holding her hand, supporting her however I could. It was the hardest thing either of us had ever been through, but also the most amazing because at the end of it, we had our son. Oliver was born at 10:15 a.m. on April 13th, weighing 7 pounds, 6 ounces, and he was absolutely perfect. I sent a text to my parents with a photo, letting them know that Oliver had arrived and that everyone was healthy. My mom responded with congratulations, "He's beautiful, we'll plan to visit soon." With some heart emojis, that was it. No phone call, no asking for more details, no rushing to the hospital now that he was born, just a text. My dad didn't respond at all. Sarah's best friend came to the hospital. My best friend came. My aunt, my dad's sister, even came when she heard, and she lives 2 hours away, but my parents, who lived 45 minutes away, couldn't be bothered. I was hurt, but I was also consumed with new parent exhaustion and trying to take care of Sarah and Oliver, so I pushed it aside. I figured maybe there really was some emergency I didn't know about, maybe someone was sick, maybe there was a crisis. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. We came home from the hospital 2 days later. My parents still hadn't visited or called. I texted asking when they wanted to come meet Oliver, and my mom said they were busy that weekend but would try to come by the following week. Busy? They were busy. They finally came to meet Oliver when he was 8 days old. 8 days. They showed up, held him for maybe 20 minutes total. My mom took a few photos, and then they said they had to leave because they had dinner plans. They were there for less than an hour. Sarah made snacks, had cleaned the whole house despite being exhausted and still recovering from birth, and they barely stayed long enough to finish a cup of coffee. I tried to talk to my mom about it, tried to express that we were hurt they hadn't been there for the birth or come to meet him sooner, and she brushed me off, saying that babies don't do much at that age anyway and that they'd have plenty of time with him as he grew up. Like that was supposed to make it better. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and adjusting to parenthood. My parents visited maybe 2 more times in the first month of Oliver's life, always briefly, always with some excuse about why they couldn't stay long. Meanwhile, I'd see my mom posting on Facebook constantly. Photos of her garden, photos of her and dad at restaurants, photos of them visiting Josh at his apartment in the city, and so many photos of Captain the dog. Then, about 2.5 months after Oliver was born, I found out about the party, and this is where I absolutely lost it. I found out through Instagram of all places. One of my cousins posted a photo from what was clearly a party with balloons and decorations and a bunch of people I recognized. The caption said something like, "Happy Gotcha Day, Captain, what a party," with a bunch of party emojis. I clicked through to see more photos, my stomach already sinking because I had a bad feeling about what I was seeing. There were dozens of photos. My parents' backyard was completely decorated with blue and gold balloons. There were streamers. There was a huge banner that said "Happy Second Gotcha Day, Captain" with paw prints all over it. There was a table full of food, and not just like chips and dip, but actual catered food. There were at least 45 people there from what I could count in the various photos. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family, friends, neighbors, all celebrating the anniversary of the day my brother adopted his dog. My parents threw a 45-person party for my brother's dog's adoption anniversary. Let me repeat that because I still can't believe it's real. They threw a massive party with decorations and catered food and dozens of guests to celebrate a dog, but they couldn't be bothered to show up for the birth of their first grandchild. They couldn't manage more than 3 brief visits in his first 2 months of life. I scrolled through all the photos feeling sick to my stomach. There was my mom holding Captain looking absolutely delighted. There was my dad grilling hamburgers and hot dogs for 45 people. There was Josh looking proud as ever, surrounded by family and friends all there to celebrate his dog. There were photos of a custom cake decorated to look like a dog bone with Captain's name on it. There were party favors. There were games. This wasn't some casual get-together. This was a full-blown party that clearly took significant planning and effort and money. And it had happened the previous weekend. The same weekend I had texted my mom asking if they wanted to come visit Oliver, and she'd said they were too busy. They were too busy planning and hosting a party for a dog. I showed Sarah the photos and she started crying. She'd been trying so hard to be understanding about my parents' distance, making excuses for them, saying that maybe some people just aren't baby people, that they'd come around eventually. But seeing this broke something in her. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face and asked what she had done wrong, why they hated her, why they didn't care about our son. It broke my heart because she hadn't done anything wrong. This wasn't about her. This was about my parents' blatant favoritism toward my brother and their absolutely insane priorities. I was furious. I was shaking with anger. I didn't call or text because I knew I needed to calm down first, but I couldn't stop looking at those photos. I noticed details that made it worse. The party was clearly planned well in advance because the decorations were custom made. The banner looked professional. The cake was from an expensive bakery I recognized. In the background of one photo, I could see what looked like a stack of presents. People had brought gifts for the dog. I started thinking back to the day Oliver was born, trying to remember exactly what my mom had said. "We have something important we need to take care of. We've committed to something and can't back out." I pulled out my phone and checked the dates. Oliver was born on April 13th. Captain's Gotcha Day party was just this past weekend in late June, so that wasn't what they were doing the day of the birth, so what was so important that day? I decided to call Josh. I tried to keep my voice calm and just asked him casually what mom and dad had been up to back in mid-April, if he knew why they'd been so busy. He didn't seem to think anything of the question and said that he thought they'd been helping him plan the Gotcha Day party, looking at venues and caterers and stuff, because he'd wanted it to be really special for Captain's second anniversary. He also mentioned that on the actual day Oliver was born, April 13th, they'd been helping him take Captain to some kind of dog show or competition a few hours away. It was an all-day thing, apparently. Let me be clear about what I learned. On the day their first grandchild was being born, my parents were at a dog show for my brother's dog. They chose a dog show over the birth of their grandson. And then they spent the next 2 months helping plan a massive party for that same dog while barely visiting said grandson. I hung up with Josh and just sat there in stunned silence. Sarah asked me what he'd said, and when I told her, she got very quiet. Then she said something that surprised me. She said, "You need to do something about this, for Oliver's sake and for ours. This isn't okay, and if you let it go, it's just going to keep happening." She was right. I'd spent my whole life making peace with being second best to Josh, but I couldn't let my son grow up experiencing that same thing. I couldn't let my parents treat Oliver as an afterthought while they threw parties for a dog. But I didn't know what to do. I've never been good at confrontation, especially with my parents. Growing up, whenever I tried to express hurt or frustration about the favoritism, I was told I was being sensitive or jealous or that I was imagining things. I'd been conditioned to just accept it. I spent a few days trying to figure out how to handle it. I talked to Sarah, I talked to my best friend, I even called my aunt who had come to the hospital when Oliver was born. She'd always been kind to me and I felt like she might understand. When I told her everything, she sighed heavily and said she wasn't surprised. She said she'd noticed the favoritism my whole life and had tried to talk to my dad about it before, but he was blind to it. She said my mom had always been obsessed with Josh, and my dad just went along with whatever my mom wanted. My aunt also told me something I hadn't known. Apparently, at the dog party, my mom had given a whole speech about how Captain had brought so much joy to their lives, and how Josh was such an amazing dog dad, and how proud they were of the home he'd made for Captain. She talked about what an important milestone this was, and how they were so grateful to celebrate it with everyone. Meanwhile, they'd held their actual first grandchild for less than an hour total in his first 2 months of life. I decided I needed to confront them directly. I called and asked if we could meet up to talk, just the three of us, and my mom immediately got defensive, asking what this was about. I said I needed to discuss some things regarding Oliver and family, and she reluctantly agreed. We set up a time for them to come over that Saturday afternoon. The days leading up to that conversation were awful. I was anxious and angry and hurt all at once. Sarah was supportive, but I could tell this whole situation was weighing on her too. She'd been dealing with postpartum depression, and this certainly wasn't helping. She felt rejected and confused about why my parents seemed to dislike her or Oliver, and no matter how many times I explained it wasn't about them, that this was about my parents' issues and their favoritism toward Josh, she still internalized it. Saturday came. My parents showed up right on time, and I could tell my mom was already on the defensive. She had that tight smile she gets when she's annoyed but trying to appear pleasant. My dad just looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. We sat down in the living room. Oliver was napping in his nursery, and Sarah stayed in there with him to give us privacy, though I knew she was listening. I'd told her everything I planned to say. I started calmly. I said that I needed to talk to them about their relationship with Oliver and with Sarah and me. I said that we'd been really hurt by their absence during the birth and their lack of involvement in the first few months of Oliver's life. My mom immediately jumped in to say that they'd been busy and that they'd visited several times and didn't understand what I was complaining about. I kept my cool and continued. I brought up the dog party. I said I'd seen the photos and heard about the planning and the effort and the money that went into it, and I asked them to help me understand how they could put all that energy into celebrating a dog's adoption anniversary but couldn't make time for their grandson. My mom's face went red. She said that the two things weren't comparable, that the party had been planned for months and Josh had really wanted to do something special and they'd committed to helping him. I pointed out that they'd had 9 months' notice about Oliver's birth, and that even if they couldn't be there for the actual birth for some reason, they'd barely visited afterward. My dad finally spoke up and said that newborns are difficult and they didn't want to intrude on our bonding time. I actually laughed at that. I couldn't help it. I said if that were true, they would have at least called regularly or asked to video chat to see him, but they'd done none of that. The only times they'd seen Oliver were when I specifically invited them over. My mom then said something that made my blood boil. She said, "Well, honey, you have to understand that Josh needs our support right now. He's single and building his career, and Captain is really important to him. You have Sarah, you have help, you're managing fine. Josh needs us more." I stared at her. I said, "Josh needs you more than your infant grandson needs his grandparents. Josh needs you to throw a 45-person party for his dog, but my son doesn't need you to show up for his birth." She got defensive and said I was twisting her words. My dad told me I was being disrespectful and that they'd raised me better than this. I felt like I was losing my mind. Here I was, calmly expressing legitimate hurt and disappointment, and they were turning it around on me. I tried a different approach. I asked them directly, "Do you want to be involved in Oliver's life or not? Because if you do, things need to change. If you don't, then just tell me now so we can adjust our expectations." My mom looked offended and said of course they wanted to be involved, that they loved Oliver, that I was being ridiculous. I asked her to show me how. I asked her to explain what being involved looked like to her, because from my perspective, they'd shown more love and interest in a dog than in their own grandchild. That's when she really got angry. She stood up and said I was being cruel and unfair, that she didn't appreciate being attacked like this, and that if I was going to be this hostile, maybe they should leave. My dad stood up too, backing her up like he always did. I said fine, leave, but this conversation wasn't over. I said that things needed to change or they were going to lose us entirely. My mom scoffed and said I was being dramatic. Then they left. I sat there on the couch, shaking with anger and adrenaline. Sarah came out of the nursery and just held me while I tried to process what had happened. The conversation had gone even worse than I'd anticipated. They hadn't listened, hadn't acknowledged any of my points, and had made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. Over the next week, I got several text messages from various family members. Apparently, my mom had called people to complain about me, saying I disrespected her and attacked her over a party, making it sound like I was jealous of a dog. She completely twisted the narrative. Some family members reached out to tell me I should apologize to my mother. Others asked what was really going on because they knew there had to be more to the story. I was tired of protecting my parents' image, so when people asked, I told them the truth. I explained that they'd missed Oliver's birth to attend a dog show, that they'd barely visited him, that they'd thrown a massive party for my brother's dog while showing minimal interest in their grandson. Most people were shocked. A few didn't believe me at first until I showed them the timeline and the receipts. My aunt was furious on my behalf. She called my dad and apparently tore into him about his parenting and his blatant favoritism. I don't know everything she said, but my dad called me afterward, angry that I was spreading family business around and making them look bad. I told him they'd made themselves look bad through their own actions and that I was simply being honest when people asked me direct questions. Then things got worse. Josh called me upset, saying that I was ruining his relationship with our parents and that I was being selfish. He said the dog party was just a fun thing and didn't mean anything, and I was reading way too much into it. I asked him how he'd feel if he had a child someday and our parents treated that child the way they'd treated Oliver. He said that was different and I knew it. I asked how. He got flustered and said he had to go. Sarah and I had long conversations about what to do next. We talked about cutting my parents off entirely, about limiting contact, about giving them an ultimatum. We were both emotionally exhausted from the whole situation. Sarah's postpartum depression was getting worse, and she admitted that my parents' rejection had really affected her mental health. She felt like she'd failed somehow, like she'd done something to make them not love our son. I assured her over and over that this wasn't about her or Oliver, that my parents had issues that existed long before she came into the picture. But I also realized that their behavior was actively harming my wife's mental health, and I couldn't allow that to continue. I decided to write an email. I wanted to get all my thoughts out clearly without being interrupted or having my words twisted. I spent hours on it, editing and revising, making sure I was clear and firm but not cruel. Sarah read it before I sent it and added a few points of her own. The email was long. I outlined everything from the beginning: their dismissive response when I called during labor, their absence for the birth, their minimal visits, the dog party, the clear contrast in their treatment of Josh versus their treatment of me and my family. I explained how their behavior had hurt us, how it was affecting Sarah's mental health, and how I refused to let Oliver grow up feeling like a burden or an afterthought to his own grandparents. I gave them an ultimatum. Either they acknowledge the problem, genuinely apologize, and commit to being present and involved grandparents with concrete actions to back it up, or we would be going no contact. I said I needed a response within 1 week and that the response needed to be substantive, not just a dismissive brush off. I sent the email on a Tuesday night. I didn't sleep well that night, anxious about what their response would be. Wednesday passed with no response. Thursday, nothing. Friday, still nothing. By Saturday, I was expecting them to just ignore it entirely or wait until after the week was up to maintain some kind of power play. But Sunday morning, I got a text from my mom, not an email response to my detailed email, but a text. It said, "We received your email. We're very hurt by your accusations. We've always loved you and done our best as parents. If you choose to cut us off over a party, that's your choice, but don't expect us to beg for a relationship with you." That was it. No acknowledgement of anything I'd said. No apology, no commitment to change, just a guilt trip and a dismissal. I showed Sarah and she just shook her head sadly. She said, "I guess that's your answer then." She was right. They'd made their choice clear. I responded to the text simply, "I'm sad that this is how you've chosen to respond. We'll be taking some space from here. Please don't contact us unless you're ready to have a real conversation about this." My mom tried to text back, but I muted the conversation. I wasn't ready to read whatever justifications or guilt trips she was sending. The next few weeks were strange. It was a relief in some ways, not having the stress of managing my parents' minimal and disappointing presence in our lives, but it was also sad. I'd grieved the grandparents I wished Oliver had, the parents I wished I had. Sarah started therapy for her postpartum depression, and it was helping. Removing my parents' negative influence actually seemed to help her mental state. She stopped blaming herself and started to see the situation more clearly for what it was. My aunt checked in on us regularly. She'd apparently had a massive fight with my dad and they weren't speaking either. She said she was proud of me for standing up for my family and that she'd always be there for Oliver. She became like a grandmother figure to him, visiting often, video chatting, sending little gifts and cards. It helped fill some of the void. About a month into our no-contact period, I got a call from Josh. He wanted to meet up for coffee to talk. I was hesitant but agreed, curious about what he wanted to say. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our places. He looked uncomfortable when I arrived, and we made awkward small talk while ordering our drinks. Once we sat down, he got quiet for a moment, then said he wanted to understand my perspective because he genuinely didn't get what the big deal was. I took a deep breath and explained it all again. The timeline, the contrast in treatment, the pattern of favoritism that had existed our whole lives. He listened, and I could see him getting defensive at points, but he let me finish. Then he said something that floored me, "But you've always been fine with it, you never seemed to care before." I stared at him. I said, "Of course I cared. I just learned not to say anything because whenever I did, I was told I was being sensitive or jealous, so I accepted it because what choice did I have?" He looked genuinely surprised. He said he'd never realized I was hurt by it, that he thought our parents treated us the same. I almost laughed at that, but I could tell he was being sincere. He was so wrapped up in being the golden child that he'd never noticed what it was like to be on the other side. I asked him directly, "Did you really not notice that they came to all your school events but missed half of mine? That they paid for your entire college but I had to take loans? That they brag about your accomplishments to everyone but barely mention mine? That they just threw you a 45-person party for your dog's adoption anniversary but couldn't be bothered to show up when their first grandchild was born?" He was quiet for a long time, then he said, "I guess I never thought about it like that, I just thought, I don't know what I thought." I told him I didn't blame him for our parents' behavior, that it wasn't his fault they played favorites, but I also told him that the dynamic wasn't sustainable anymore, especially now that I had a son to protect. I said I couldn't watch Oliver be treated as less important than Josh's dog. Josh actually flinched at that. He said, "The party was just supposed to be a small thing. Mom was the one who wanted to make it big, I didn't ask for all that." I asked him why he let her then, why he didn't say that maybe a massive party wasn't appropriate when they'd barely acknowledged their grandson. He didn't have a good answer. We talked for over an hour. It was the most honest conversation Josh and I had ever had. He admitted that our parents bobbied him, that he probably relied on them too much, that maybe the dog thing had gotten out of hand. But he also got defensive when I suggested he should talk to them about their treatment of me and Oliver. He said it wasn't his place to get in the middle of it. I told him that by staying silent, he was taking their side. He didn't like that, but he didn't argue with it either. We left things awkwardly. He said he'd think about everything I'd said. I didn't hold my breath for anything to change. Another month passed. Oliver was growing and changing every day, hitting new milestones, and my parents were missing all of it. I felt sad about that sometimes, but mostly I felt relieved not to have to deal with their rejection and favoritism. Then I found out through social media that Josh had gotten engaged. Apparently, he'd been dating someone for the past 6 months and had kept it relatively quiet, which wasn't unusual for him. But now he was engaged, and my parents were over the moon about it from what I could see in the photos and comments. I didn't reach out to congratulate him. We hadn't spoken since the coffee shop conversation, and I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. But a few days after the engagement announcement, I got a call from my mom. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She sounded excited and happy, completely different from our last interactions. She said, "Hi honey, I hope you're well. I wanted to let you know that Josh got engaged and we're starting to plan the wedding. It's going to be in about 6 months, and of course we want you and Sarah and Oliver there. I was hoping we could put all this unpleasantness behind us and come together as a family for this happy occasion." I was silent for a moment, processing the audacity. Then I said, "So to be clear, you're not calling to apologize or to work on our relationship. You're calling because you want us to show up for Josh's wedding and pretend everything is fine." She got that tight tone in her voice and said, "I'm calling to extend an olive branch. This is a family event and you should be there." I said, "Mom, I sent you a detailed email months ago explaining exactly how you and Dad hurt us and what needed to happen for us to move forward. You dismissed it. You've made no effort to repair the relationship or to be involved in Oliver's life. And now you want us to show up and play happy family for Josh's benefit." She said I was being stubborn and holding a grudge, and that family should be able to move past disagreements for important events. I asked her if she considered Oliver's birth an important event. She went quiet. I said, "You missed his birth for a dog show, Mom. You threw a 45-person party for a dog, but you've held your grandson for maybe a total of 2 hours in his entire life. and you see nothing wrong with that, so no, I don't think we'll be attending the wedding. When and if you're ready to actually address the issues I laid out in my email, we can talk. Until then, please don't contact us unless it's for that purpose." She started to argue, but I hung up. I was shaking, but I also felt strong. I'd set a boundary and held to it. Sarah was proud of me. She said it was the right call, that we couldn't keep letting them treat us this way. My phone blew up after that. My dad called, angry, demanding I reconsider and stop being selfish. Josh called, asking me not to ruin his wedding with family drama. Various relatives called or texted with opinions, some supporting me, others saying I should just suck it up and go to keep the peace. I ignored most of it. I sent one text to Josh saying that I was happy for him and wished him well, but that I couldn't attend the wedding while things were unresolved with our parents. I said it wasn't about him, it was about me protecting my family and maintaining boundaries. He responded saying I was making his wedding about me and my issues. I didn't reply to that. My aunt called to check on me and said she wasn't going to the wedding either, in solidarity, which I appreciated but told her wasn't necessary. She said it was her choice and she was tired of watching my parents treat me like garbage. The wedding planning continued without us. I saw photos on social media of my mom dress shopping with Josh's fiancé, of my parents hosting an engagement party, of all the excited preparation. It stung a little, but mostly I just felt numb to it. Then something interesting happened. About 2 months before the wedding, I got a message from Josh's fiancée, Emma. We'd only met a handful of times before all this, so I was surprised to hear from her. She said she wanted to meet up and talk, just the two of us, if I was willing. She said she'd been hearing a lot of different versions of the family situation and wanted to hear my side directly. I was skeptical but agreed. We met for lunch on a Saturday. Sarah stayed home with Oliver and I went into it with low expectations. Emma was actually really direct, which I appreciated. She said Josh had told her there was family drama but had been vague about the details, saying I was upset about a party and was overreacting. But she'd also noticed some things that didn't add up. She said my mom talked about Captain the dog constantly but had barely mentioned having a grandson. She'd also noticed that in the family photos at my parents' house, there were dozens of photos of Josh and Captain, but only a few old photos of me and none of Oliver. I gave her the full story, the whole timeline, the examples of favoritism growing up, everything with Oliver's birth and the dog party, the failed conversations, and the current estrangement. I showed her my original email to my parents so she could see that I'd tried to address it maturely. She listened to everything, asked some clarifying questions, and then sat back and said, "Wow, Josh really undersold how bad this is." I asked her what he'd told her. She said he'd made it sound like I was jealous of the dog party and was causing drama over nothing, that our parents were just trying to be supportive of him and I was taking it personally. She then said something that gave me hope. "I need to talk to Josh about this because this isn't okay. I don't want to marry into a family with this kind of dysfunction without addressing it, and I especially don't want future kids being part of this if your parents are going to play favorites." I told her I appreciated that but didn't want to cause problems in their relationship. She said I wasn't causing anything, that this was information she needed to know, and she was glad she'd reached out to me. We talked for a while longer, and she actually apologized on behalf of the family for how I'd been treated, which was more than my actual parents had ever done. She said she'd talk to Josh and figure out what to do from there. I left that lunch feeling weird. On one hand, it was validating to have someone from their side actually listen and understand. On the other hand, I didn't want to get my hopes up that anything would actually change. A few days later, Josh called me. He sounded stressed. He said Emma had talked to him about our conversation and had also started noticing the favoritism herself, and now she was upset and questioning things. He said, "Why did you have to drag her into this?" I said I didn't drag her into anything, she reached out to me. And that if he was upset his fiancée knew the truth about our family dynamics, maybe that should tell him something about those dynamics. We argued. He said I was trying to sabotage his relationship and his wedding. I said I was simply being honest when asked direct questions, and if the truth was damaging, that wasn't my fault. He hung up on me. But apparently Emma didn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I heard from my aunt that there was tension between Josh and our parents. Emma had confronted them about their treatment of me and Oliver, and they'd gotten defensive. She'd also apparently told them that she expected any future children she and Josh had to be treated equally to all other grandchildren, and if she saw any sign of the favoritism I'd experienced, there would be problems. My mom was apparently very upset about this, feeling attacked and saying that Emma was being manipulated by me, but Emma held firm. The wedding was now a month away. I hadn't changed my mind about not attending, and my parents were apparently very upset about how it would look to have me missing from family photos. Then I got an email from my dad, not my mom, which was unusual, but my dad. It was short. It said, "Son, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Can we please talk? Just you and me. I'll come to you." I was skeptical, but something about it felt different. I talked to Sarah about it, and she said it was my choice, but to be careful and not get my hopes up. I responded saying he could come over the following Saturday morning. That Saturday, my dad showed up alone. He looked older than I remembered, tired. We sat in the living room again, the site of our last disastrous family conversation. He started by saying, "I owe you an apology, a real one." I waited, not saying anything. He continued, "Emma coming into the family has been eye-opening. She sees things clearly that I've been blind to, or maybe that I didn't want to see. She pointed out things about how we treat you versus Josh, and once she said it, I couldn't unsee it. Then I started thinking back over the years, and I realized you were right. We have played favorites. I have played favorites." I still didn't speak. I'd waited too long for this to jump in too quickly. He said, "Your mother, she's always had a special attachment to Josh. He was a difficult baby, had colic and health issues early on, and I think she bonded with him differently because of that, and I just went along with it. When you were growing up, you were so independent and capable, and Josh always needed more help, more attention, and we let that become the pattern. We told ourselves you were fine, you didn't need us as much, but that wasn't fair to you." He paused, looking down at his hands. "And then with Oliver, your mom was so caught up in helping Josh plan that party, and I just went along with it like I always do. When you called saying Sarah was in labor, we were already on our way to that dog show thing, and your mom said we'd committed to it and couldn't back out, and I didn't push back. I should have. I should have said we needed to turn around and go to the hospital. Our grandson was being born. Nothing should have been more important than that." His voice cracked a little. "I've missed 3 months of his life. Emma showed me photos and videos that Josh had from your social media, and I've missed so much. And that's on me, that's on us." I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my composure. "Where's Mom? Does she feel the same way?" He sighed. "Your mother is struggling with this. She doesn't see it the same way yet. She feels attacked and defensive, but I'm working on her. Emma's been working on her too, actually, not letting her make excuses." I said, "Dad, I appreciate you saying all this. I do, but I've been hurt by you and Mom my entire life. This isn't just about Oliver as much as that was the breaking point. This is about a lifetime of being treated as less important than Josh, and I can't just accept an apology and move on without things actually changing." He nodded. "I understand, and I'm not asking you to. I'm asking for a chance to do better, to be a real grandfather to Oliver, to be a better father to you." I asked him what that looked like to him. He actually had specifics, which surprised me. He said he wanted to visit regularly, at least once a week. He wanted to be involved, to babysit, to be present for milestones. He said he'd already told my mom that they were scaling back their involvement in Josh's life, that he was a grown man and didn't need them hovering constantly. He also said, "I need to make something clear. What happened with the dog party? That will never happen again. It was inappropriate, and I see that now. Josh is upset with us right now because we've told him we're not going to be helping him with everything anymore, that he needs to be more independent. He thinks we're abandoning him because of you, but that's not it. It's about restoring some balance." I didn't know what to say. This was more than I'd expected, but I was still cautious. I told him I needed to think about it and talk to Sarah. He said he understood. Then he asked if he could see Oliver just for a few minutes. I hesitated, then called Sarah out. I explained what my dad had said, and she looked skeptical but said it was up to me. I brought Oliver out, and my dad's face just crumbled when he saw him. He held out his arms hesitantly, and I placed Oliver in them. My dad started crying, actually crying, saying, "He's gotten so big, I've missed so much." It was hard to watch. Part of me felt vindicated that he was finally getting it, but part of me was still angry that it had taken this long and required a third party pointing it out. He held Oliver for about 10 minutes, just looking at him, talking softly to him. Oliver, being a friendly baby, smiled at him, which made my dad cry more. Before he left, he said again that he was sorry and that he wanted to do better. He said I didn't have to come to the wedding if I wasn't comfortable, but that he hoped we could start rebuilding our relationship regardless. After he left, Sarah and I had a long talk. She said it seemed genuine, but that we should take it slow and see if his actions matched his words. I agreed. Over the next few weeks, my dad did follow through. He called and asked to visit, then actually showed up and spent real time with Oliver. He asked questions about our lives, actually listened to the answers, and acted like a present grandfather. He helped with some projects around our house. He brought gifts that were thoughtful, not just generic. My mom didn't come with him. He said she was still processing everything and wasn't ready yet, but that she was getting there. The wedding approached. I still didn't feel comfortable going, and my dad said he understood. But he asked if he could at least take some photos of Oliver to show people who asked about his grandson so they knew he existed and was part of the family. I agreed to that. The week before the wedding, I finally heard from my mom. She sent a text asking if she could come by, just her without my dad. I was nervous but agreed. She showed up with a gift bag, which immediately made me wary. Was she trying to buy her way back in? We sat down and she looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for my mom. She's normally very composed and in control. She started with, "I don't really know how to do this. Apologizing isn't something I'm good at." I said, "I've noticed." She flinched a little at that but continued, "Your dad has been on my case for weeks. Emma has been on my case. Even Josh finally admitted that maybe things have been unbalanced, and I've been angry about all of it because I don't like being told I'm a bad mother." I waited. She said, "But I've been thinking about it, really thinking, and I looked back at photos and memories and I can see what you're talking about. I can see that I treated Josh differently. I told myself it was because he needed me more, but that was an excuse, and with Oliver." She stopped, her voice shaking. "I was so focused on Josh and that stupid party. It seemed important at the time, and I didn't think about what message it was sending. I didn't think about how you'd feel, and when you confronted us about it, I got defensive instead of listening." She pulled out her phone and showed me something. It was her camera roll, and she'd created an album labeled Oliver, but it only had about 10 photos in it, all from his first week. Then she showed me her album labeled Captain, which had hundreds of photos. She said, "I looked at this the other day and I felt sick. This is my grandson, my first grandchild, and I have more photos of a dog. What is wrong with me?" I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say. She continued, "I know I've been a terrible grandmother, and a terrible mother to you apparently for a long time. I don't know if I can fix it, but I want to try, if you'll let me." She opened the gift bag and pulled out a photo album. She'd made a physical album with the few photos she had of Oliver, but had left most of it empty. She said, "I was hoping you could help me fill this with photos and memories I've missed, and that maybe I can be there for the future ones." It was a small gesture, but it felt more genuine than anything she'd done before. I told her the same thing I'd told my dad, that I appreciated the apology but that I needed to see consistent change, not just words. She said she understood. She asked if she could see Oliver. I brought him out, and unlike my dad's emotional reaction, my mom was quiet. She held him carefully and just watched him. Then she said quietly, "I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you were born. I should have been there." It was the most direct acknowledgement I'd gotten from her. She didn't stay long, said she didn't want to overstay, but asked if she could come back. I said we'd figure out a schedule. After she left, I felt emotionally exhausted but also cautiously hopeful. The wedding happened without us. I saw photos on social media and it looked beautiful. But I also noticed something. In the family photos, my parents looked strained, not quite as joyful as I would have expected. And I heard from my aunt that my mom had apparently broken down at one point, upset that I wasn't there and that Oliver wasn't in the family photos. Josh and Emma went on their honeymoon and life continued. My parents kept up their visits, both of them now about once a week. They were trying, I could see that. My mom would take tons of photos of Oliver, would send them to me later asking if she could post them on Facebook, which I appreciated her asking. My dad would play with Oliver, help with household projects, actually act like an involved grandfather. It wasn't perfect. There were moments where I could see old patterns trying to emerge, like when my mom mentioned something Josh needed and started to say she was going to cancel on us to help him, then caught herself and said Josh could handle it himself. But it was progress. About a month after the wedding, Josh reached out wanting to talk again. We met up, and he said that he and Emma had been discussing everything and he wanted to apologize. He said he'd been blind to the favoritism and had taken advantage of it without realizing how it affected me. He said, "Emma pointed out that if we have kids, they're going to be compared to Oliver, and she won't tolerate them being favored just like you won't tolerate Oliver being treated as less than. And she's right. It's not fair and it's not healthy." I appreciated the apology. I asked him how he felt about mom and dad pulling back from him. He admitted it was an adjustment, that he'd gotten used to relying on them for a lot, but that it was probably good for him to be more independent. He said, "Plus, Emma wasn't going to marry someone who couldn't function without his parents, so there's that." We laughed a little and it felt good. We'd never been super close as brothers, probably because of the family dynamics, but maybe there was a chance to build something better. As the months went on, things continued to improve slowly. My parents were consistent with their visits and their efforts. My mom actually apologized to Sarah directly for making her feel unwelcome and unloved, which Sarah appreciated. Oliver's first birthday rolled around and we decided to have a small party. We invited my parents, Josh and Emma, my aunt, and a few close friends. I was nervous about how it would go, if my parents would actually show up and be present or if they'd find an excuse. They showed up early to help set up. My mom had made a homemade cake and my dad had bought decorations. They stayed the entire party, engaged and present, taking photos and playing with Oliver. My mom gave a little speech about how grateful she was to be there and how much she loved her grandson. It was the day I'd wished for when he was born, just 9 months late. After the party, after everyone left and we were cleaning up, Sarah said, "I think they really are trying." I agreed. It wasn't perfect and there was still hurt that would take time to heal, but it was better. A few weeks after Oliver's birthday, my mom asked if we could have coffee, just the two of us. We met up and she told me something I hadn't known. She said that after our big confrontation, after I'd sent that email and we'd gone no contact, she'd actually gone to therapy. Just a few sessions, but the therapist had helped her see some things about herself, about her parenting, about her relationship with Josh. She said, the therapist asked me why I felt like Josh needed me so much, and I realized it was because being needed made me feel important. With you, you were always so capable and independent, and I didn't feel needed, so I didn't feel as important. And that was my issue, not yours. I made you feel neglected because of my own insecurities. It was a level of self-awareness I'd never seen from her. She continued, and with the dog party and all of that, I got so caught up in planning and doing and being involved in Josh's life that I didn't step back and see how ridiculous it was. A party for a dog while my grandson was barely acknowledged. The therapist asked me how I'd feel if someone told me that story about someone else, and I was horrified. But I'd been so defensive that I couldn't see it when it was my own actions. She said therapy had helped her understand the favoritism and its impact, and that she was trying to be more aware of her patterns. I told her I was proud of her for going to therapy and doing that work. She said she wished she'd done it years ago, that maybe things would have been different. We can't change the past, but we were working on the future. Fast forward to now, about 6 months after Oliver's first birthday. Things aren't perfect, but they're so much better. My parents are involved grandparents. They visit regularly, they babysit, they're present for milestones. They've learned Oliver's routine and his preferences. They actually put in effort. My relationship with Josh has also improved. We're not super close, but we're friendly. We get together sometimes for family dinners. Emma is actually great, and she keeps everyone accountable when old patterns start to emerge. The dog thing has even balanced out. Captain is still part of the family, but the obsession has calmed down. My mom still posts photos of him sometimes, but she posts just as many of Oliver now. Last month, my mom actually said something that shocked me. We were at their house for dinner, and she was showing us that she'd rearranged their photo wall. She'd taken down some of the excessive Captain photos and put up photos of Oliver, photos of our family, and even some old photos of me that she'd dug out. She said, I was looking at this wall and realized it didn't reflect what actually matters. This is better. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot. I've been reflecting on this whole situation a lot. The betrayal of them missing Oliver's birth, the absurdity of the dog party, the pain of the favoritism, all of it. Part of me wishes I'd confronted them years ago about the golden child dynamic, but I also don't think they would have listened back then. It took me setting hard boundaries, going no contact, and third parties like Emma validating my experience for them to actually take it seriously. I've also realized that I can forgive them while still acknowledging the hurt they caused. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen or that it didn't matter. It means choosing to move forward while remembering the lessons learned. Sarah and I are in a good place now. Her postpartum depression is much better, she's thriving in her career, and our little family is strong. Oliver is about to turn 18 months old, and he's the light of our lives. He knows his grandparents, actually has a relationship with them, which I'm grateful for. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't stood up for myself and my family. If I just accepted their behavior and let Oliver grow up feeling like an afterthought. I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I demanded better, even though it was hard and scary and messy. The situation taught me a lot about boundaries, about self-worth, about breaking generational patterns. I don't want Oliver to ever feel the way I felt growing up. I want him to know his worth isn't dependent on being the favorite or the most needed. I want him to know he's loved fully and unconditionally. And if we have more kids, which we're thinking about, I want to make sure they're all treated equally, that none of them feel like they have to compete for love or attention. As for the dog, Captain is fine. He's still living his best life, completely unaware of the family drama that surrounded his second gotcha day party. Josh and Emma actually just got a second dog, a rescue puppy, and my parents' response was much more measured. They said congratulations and offered to dog sit if needed, but there was no talk of a party. Progress. I still have moments where I feel angry about everything that happened. When I see other families where grandparents were present from day one, I feel a pang of sadness for what we missed out on. The first few months of Oliver's life, the birth story, all of that is tainted by my parents' absence and the hurt that caused. But I'm also proud of how we handled it. We didn't just accept unacceptable behavior. We didn't pretend everything was fine to keep the peace. We stood up for ourselves and our son, and ultimately it led to real change. My dad told me recently that Emma saving their relationship with us was one of the best things that could have happened. He said without her outside perspective and her refusal to accept the dysfunction, they might have lost us permanently. He said he's grateful she pushed them to do better. I'm grateful too, honestly. I don't know if my parents would have ever come around without that push. Looking back at that original title, my parents skipped my son's birth but threw a 45-guest party for my brother's dog. It still sounds absurd. It still makes me angry. But it's no longer the end of the story. It's the catalyst that forced everything into the open and eventually led to healing and change. Would I prefer that they'd just been good parents and grandparents from the start? Of course. But since that wasn't the reality, I'm glad we ended up here rather than in a permanent estrangement or a fake relationship built on resentment. Sarah says I should write all this down for Oliver someday so he understands the importance of boundaries and standing up for yourself. Maybe I will, or maybe this post is that record. To anyone reading this who's dealing with family favoritism or feeling like you're not enough compared to a sibling, it's not you. It's not your fault. You deserve better, and it's okay to demand better. It's okay to set boundaries, even with parents, even when it's hard. It's okay to protect your own family and your own peace. And to anyone who's struggling with their parents not showing up for their kids, I see you. It's painful and it's unfair. Your kids deserve grandparents who love them and prioritize them. And if those grandparents can't or won't step up, it's okay to limit or cut contact. You're not depriving your children, the grandparents are depriving themselves. I never thought a dog's birthday party would be the thing that broke my family open and forced us to deal with decades of dysfunction. But here we are. Life is weird. Sometimes I joke with Sarah that we should throw Oliver an absolutely massive second birthday party just to really cement the point. She laughs but also says we probably shouldn't be petty. She's right, of course, but it's fun to imagine. The truth is, Oliver's second birthday will probably be similar to his first. A small, intimate gathering of people who truly love him and want to be there. And my parents will be there, present and engaged, which is all I ever really wanted. That's enough for me, it has to be. This whole experience has changed me as a person and as a parent. I'm more aware of favoritism and more committed to treating any future children we have equally. I'm better at setting boundaries. I'm better at standing up for myself and my family. I'm less willing to accept crumbs of affection and call it enough. And I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unloving behavior. That boundaries aren't mean, they're necessary. That you can love your parents while also acknowledging they've hurt you. That repair is possible if both parties are willing to do the work. My parents are doing the work now, finally. It took a lot to get here, but they're trying. And I'm trying too, trying to forgive, trying to trust again, trying to build something new and healthier. Is it perfect? No. Are there still moments of tension and old patterns? Yes. But it's better, so much better than it was. And Oliver has grandparents who love him, who show up for him, who want to be part of his life. That's what matters most. So that's my story. The story of how my parents missing my son's birth for a dog show and then throwing a massive party for that same dog ended up being the thing that finally forced us to address decades of family dysfunction. It's messy and painful and sometimes absurd, but it's also a story of boundaries and growth and second chances. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe my parents will maintain this progress, maybe we'll have setbacks, maybe things will continue to get better. But whatever happens, I know that I stood up for my family and I know that I won't accept less than we deserve. And honestly, that's enough. That has to be enough. If you've read this far, thank you for listening. Sometimes you just need to tell your story, to put it all out there, to process everything that happened. This has been therapeutic in a way. And if anyone ever tries to tell you that a dog's gotcha day party is more important than a grandchild's birth, you have my permission to show them this post and let them know how that worked out. Final update for anyone wondering, my mom just texted me asking if she can take Oliver to the park tomorrow. She wants one-on-one time with him. A year ago, this wouldn't have happened. So yeah, things really have changed. It's not the story I wanted to tell when Oliver was born. I wanted to tell a story of joy and family coming together and grandparents who were over the moon about their first grandchild. Instead, I have this complicated, messy story of betrayal and confrontation and slow healing. But it's honest and it's real, and maybe that's worth something too. Anyway, I need to go. Oliver just woke up from his nap and Sarah's calling me. Life goes on and it's pretty good these days. Thanks for reading my novel of a post. I hope it helps someone out there who's dealing with similar family stuff. You're not alone, you're not crazy, and you deserve better.